Yo, what up everybody? It's Nathan here, and today I'm going to show you how to use Decapitator. It's a deceptively simple tool to use, but it can also be very kind of confusing if you don't read the manual or just want to skip through that. This would be a great tutorial to watch because I'm going to save you all that time. I'm going to explain it, the way I use it, and just how great it is. Now, I'm going to be upfront with what I think of Decapitator. I think it's exceptional for like very aggressive kinds of saturation, as well as even subtle kinds of saturation, and I felt like there was going to be a negative in there, but I already forgot about it. I'm in a positive mood today, so Decapitator is great all around. So let's just, we might discover what those things are as we move through it. So let's just start with how it works. When you open up Decapitator, I'm going to give you an overview to begin with. That way you can hear everything that's important about it multiple times throughout this tutorial, okay? So the way it works is the first stage of Decapitator is the drive stage, which is right here. It's controlled by this knob. By default, we're in E mode. There's different saturation curves, which are denoted by these A, E, N, T, P. All right, so you hit the drive stage. As you turn that up, you're going to get more distortion. So we have our sound like this right now. Turn it up, you get more distortion. Distorts it, okay? Standard distortion. Punish is a multiplier. So if I had it at 5, it sounded like this. It's going to be twice as intense, right? Just allows you to just drive it even harder. So if you want to punish that out of your sound, you just want to make it a dirty, nutty sound. Yeah, that's what you do. All right, so next you have your low cut. Now, it's a bit interesting because it's not showing up. There it is. Your low cut actually happens before your drive stage, and your high cut actually happens after your drive stage. So if I were a UI designer and I wanted this to make sense, I would actually take my drive and I'd put it right in the place where this little tone control is, and then I would just take the drive and put it right before the tone control right in there, because the drive happens after low cut, and then the drive, yeah, anyway, so we'll get back to that in a moment. I just lost where I was going. But anyway, so the low cut happens before your drive stage, and the high cut happens after your drive stage. Now, why is it set up this way? Well, because typically your low frequencies are going to wreak havoc on the responsiveness and kind of predictability of your saturation. It's a very important thing to have control of, because saturation and distortion can get really out of hand really quick. So let me show you what I mean by that. Let's put this on punish mode, and watch what happens as I turn this low cut up to remove those low frequencies. Notice how the sound shape changes. Very cool. Again, that's just a very fun sound, very simple, kind of change you can make to the sound. Now, the high cut is basically just a low pass filter. That's it. It's probably 6 dB per octave. So let's just kind of tweak that now, darken up the sound. Just a low pass filter. I used to think it was before the distortion as well, but it's not. And yeah, anyway, so the tone control, if I could have my way with how where this tone control is positioned, this tone control allows you to basically create what's called a tilt shelf. And I'll tell you where it's actually positioned in the chain, don't worry. We'll get to that. But the tone control is a tilt shelf. What that means is that if you turn it to bright, you get an EQ curve that's like this, where the top band is boosting and the low band is cutting. That changes the balance of the sound. So if we just have this at 0 right now, you get a sound that's pretty normal. So you see how it makes it brighter and darker, right? This is why they write bright and dark. It's very intuitive, helps to kind of visually see what that is. By the way, this is a very, very important EQ maneuver technique to be aware of. Not only is it super powerful, but it's also super lazy and extremely effective at shaping sounds. I use this, or at least one half of it, all the time. Shelves are great. Do not forget the power of the shelf. It's probably the easiest way to get what you're after with little confusion. All right, so yeah, like I said, this tone control is a tilt shelf. So if I turn it bright, we're going to get a brighter sound. I'll turn it on. Sort of hard to tell. Let's pull in those low frequencies again. Let's show you what I mean. Turn punish off. And then let's show you what I mean. We're going to start with dark, and then we'll go back up to midline, and then back to bright. It's going to darken the sound as I turn it down. Darker, and then the bright. Again, it's that tilt shelf happening, and it's happening post the filter section as best as I can tell. I mean, that would make sense as to where you'd have it. I mean, for all I know, it could be happening before the filter section, but rest assured, I can tell you this, it's happening after that drive stage. It's a tone control, and so it's happening after the drive stage. All right, so if I could have this set up in the way that I thought was most logical, it would actually be a strip of these 4 controls. It would be the low cut first, because it's the first thing the sound goes through, then the drive, right? And then since the drive gets sent to your high cut, it'd be the high cut, and the tone control is the final control. The tone would be after. I mean, UI designers, come on. What are you guys doing? I mean, this looks pretty and all, but I don't know. I think that things should be set up in the way that your mind moves through it, and that's the way it moves through. Anyway, but despite the fact that I just said that, I still think this is beautifully set up since there's only like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 knobs. It doesn't really need to be set up that way. Very easy to follow. And then you have this output stage. The output stage has auto gain attached to it. That's what the auto switch does. And that just allows Decapitator to gain match the sound to stay at relatively the same volume. Now, it does its best. Really, it just sort of prevents it from getting too loud as opposed to kind of keeping it at the same volume. Not too good at doing that, but it will prevent it from breaking your ears as you turn up that distortion, which I think is very useful to just keep that on. Once you've done some pretty heavy-handed distortion, though, let me show you what I mean. Turn this up with punish. Turn it gradually. It's going to make the sound too quiet, so I'll show you what I mean. Let's just do that. It's too quiet. I like to come over here, turn this off, and then set the output gain myself. Now next is the mix knob. Now a surprising number of people don't use this as much as they could, but sometimes you want to color a sound, but you don't want to change it too much. So it's very fun to get really aggressive with the distortion and then just sort of turn it off and gradually mix it in and see what kind of warmth and character you can just subtly add to the sound. Very fun control. The mix knob is really, when I think of the mix knob inside of Decapitator, the way that I'm thinking about it is I really just zero it out, and then I think to myself, okay, how much of that original kind of in-your-face character do I want to add to the sound? How much do I want to kind of icing on the cake do I want to add? Because I already got my cake. The original sound is the cake. This becomes your icing if you're using that mix knob. If you have it as 100, this becomes like a paper shredder or a beef grinder or some other device that's meant to take things in their original form and immediately apply what we might call entropy to them, and therefore rip them apart, make them meaningless and pointless. And that's actually, this makes things very this gives them a purpose in your track. Whereas before they were lifeless, boring, and just didn't have character. This is going to give it character. So let's go through these distortion settings, which I'm going to pretend to know a lot about, but really I'm going to tell you just some very basic things about them after we listen to them. The first thing I'm going to say is number E. The E distortion setting is the one I use the most. My understanding is it actually mimics a triode tube or transistor. Triode tube or transistor. That's what it mimics. It's the most common one. It gives you very pleasing amounts of distortion. Each setting is just a different tone control. It's up to you to figure out the sound of them. So taking our current preset, I'm going to show you what it does. We're just going to start with E, and then we'll go through all the way back to A. So let's start with E. So what you're going to notice, the difference, if you keep everything else the same, the difference between each setting is not only going to be how it distorts, it's also going to be how transient information is maintained in the sound. Because what some people don't realize about saturation is that saturation is also a form of compression. And so since there's compression that's sort of happening under the hood inside of Decapitator, that means that your attack and release timings are sort of changing based on the settings. So with E, it appears that you have a very fast attack setting, very fast release, and it has a bit of a slower attack, which allows those transients to come through a little bit better. Though, admittedly, it appears to have a very fast attack on the top frequencies. The 1 kHz plus frequencies are being just squashed. Let's go up to T now. Now, because these are different settings and they have sort of lower or more gentle saturation curves, you got to turn that drive up higher to kind of get similar distortions. T is a little bit thinner when you drive it harder, but when it's lower, it's a lot warmer, a little bit more gentle, and it's pretty exciting. You go to B, P. So very simple stuff. I mean, it all just changes the sort of tonal balance of the sound, how quickly it distorts. Like I said, I honestly, when I pull this in, I use E so much, I can't remember the last time I went out of my way to use A, N, T, and P. Doesn't mean I don't use them, it's just that when you drive them really hard, they get pretty similar, right? So let's go through all of them at this insane driving. It's a lie. I lied to you. I was wrong. They all sound different. However, I don't like to confuse myself when I pull this up. This is a saturation unit, and I prefer E for saturation for some reason. But again, you have 6 very simple settings. So if you like, once you figured out your saturation that you like in, E or wherever you started, you can flip through them and see if you happen to like one more. I don't like to try to find a better saturation than what I started with. I think that wastes time. So I like to just get something that I think is close enough, flip through the preset, see if it changes the sound in a way that I think is like 30, maybe 40% better than what I started with. If it is, then I might come back and tweak the drive settings and so forth. So let's give you an example of what I mean by that. Like literally, like I prefer E for that. So let's say I liked more distortion, like 5. So at 5, I would like A more than E, right? This is how I sort of group everything together. I don't try to readjust the distortion into each distortion thing. That's too much for me. That's too confusing. That's pointless. Don't do that. That's professor shit. And yeah, but why am I saying that? Anyway, so thanks, Avicii. Rip, bro. It's too bad. Anyway, so I didn't like your music, but you were an artist, and I respect that. All right, so then so let's do number N. Let's do N, and let's start with that at 7. Right, so between N and A, you sort of have to decide, okay, I like one of these more than the other. Right now, I feel like I like N more. I like N more, right? Let's do N versus T or P. Between those three at that distortion, I like N more. Let's put it at 10, and let's try T. Versus P at 10. So I like P the most. And then let's compare the distortion of P at 10 against the rest. It's a toss-up between T and P, to be honest. Just depends what you're after. So A is very natural at high levels of distortion. So in this case at 10, it'd be a toss-up between N, T, P, or A, depending on just the sound that you like at the moment, right? It's really about, you may not necessarily be choosing what works best for your track sometimes. Sometimes, especially with distortion, because it's really, it's very random. Distortion is very hard to predict how it's going to influence your sound. You're really just going for a kind of randomization of the tonal balance of your sound. If you try to be a wizard with this stuff, you're going to have a bad time. This is the most imperfect thing you could do. It's the most inaccurate kind of sound design that there is. You're just meant to sort of, it's like rolling the dice and hoping for the best, and it's really fun to use. So between these, I really like A at 10 for some reason. I really do. That's just fun. You hear how that like it maintains those low frequencies in there. Very, very cool. So that's really how I use that drive parameter when I'm trying to find the preset. I typically don't reshape my low cut, my tone, or my high cut. Like, say for example, I did find what I wanted as like my ideal drive tone. You know, I might come back and I might actually start shaping things into the drive stage again. So I might tweak this low cut. Do that, might make it a little bit brighter or darker. Right, so I could do that, but I'd rather just take the high cut away, make it a little bit darker. I feel like that's a more natural sound. I'm not a big fan of Soundtoys filters. I think they're pretty, they're very nice. They're very clean. Actually, not very clean. They're very analog. But you know, now with things like the drop, I'm not the biggest. I've been spoiled. Admittedly, I wish the drop had better, more intense drive, but it doesn't, or at least a punish button. I wish it had a punish button for its drive parameter. Actually, technically it does, but anyway, so that's pretty much how I use it. Keep in mind that what I do is I always start by distorting with E, and then I run that drive, figure out where I want it, then I configure the low cut to sort of shape how my drive responds. Then I bring up the high cut if I need to roll off any top end, which I don't do very often. I use that tone control much more often to kind of make it either darker or brighter once I've got my distorted sound. Then from there, if the sound got too quiet, I might have to come over here and turn auto off and change the volume myself. From there, I would then flip through the distortion settings to see which one I might like more. Given keeping everything else the same, I find the one that I like the most. From there, if I found a new one, I might further shape the low cut, see if I can cut any more low frequencies, get a tighter response, maybe touch the tone again, and that's it. It's really designed to be a very simple tool. A lot of people, including myself, when I'm producing, I don't go this deep into it. I just, flip on the drive, might fool around with a punish. It's been forever since I've actually, really gone deep on the distortion settings that we have available to us. So hopefully that gives you guys a good rundown of how I use Decapitator. It's a really amazing saturator. I think it's very useful for just really aggressive forms of saturation. For kind of overall shaping a sound for the mix, I think a multi-band distortion unit like Combinat is actually going to give you a little more control, because in the context of a mix, you typically want specific frequencies of a sound poking out. Very often I will saturate just the top end of like a piano or a pluck synth or a lead synth just to get it to poke better, because it sounds better than a shelf at low levels. Decapitator doesn't really allow you to do that. It's much more of a heavy-handed form of distortion, or if you use kind of lower levels of drive, it warms up the sound a bit. So it's something to keep in mind. Let me know what you guys think. If you like this video and you find the content very helpful, hit that like and subscribe button below, and we will see you guys in the next video.